Welcome to Ms. Hook's Bio 139 lecture on blood. So for this chapter, we're going to go through the different parts of blood and their functions. So what are the parts? What is it composed of? Blood is a connective tissue. If you remember correctly from histology, it's the only fluid one. And the thing about connective tissues is that they have cells that are important, but they also have this extracellular matrix, this background of proteins and fluid that are important for that functioning tissue. Their fluid portion is plasma. It has different things dissolved in there that we'll look at that. And then it's got formed elements. These are all the cells and the parts of cells. So erythrocytes, red blood cells, leukocytes, white blood cells, and platelets. So we'll look at each of these three. Red blood cells carry oxygen, white blood cells are important for immune function, and platelets are important for clotting. If you want to see the different parts of blood, what you can do is put a blood sample in a centrifuge which spins really, really fast. And then the result of that fast spinning is that the heaviest part goes to the bottom, the most dense, the lightest, least dense portion goes to the top. So you can see what portion of their blood is plasma, which portion is white blood cells and platelets, and how much is erythrocytes, red blood cells. The hematocrit is the percent that's red blood cells. It's important to maintain a normal level of red blood cells. If your blood doesn't have enough, if your hematocrit is too low, you're going to be anemic and not be able to carry enough oxygen. If it's too high, your blood is going to be very thick, very viscous, and hard to push through the heart and vessels. Now let's look at the physical characteristics. So it's sticky, opaque, it's not clear, and the color ranges from a bright red to a dark red. The blood in our bodies is never actually blue, even though it kind of looks like it, and we'll use that to represent deoxygenated blood because it's easier to see the difference between blue and red than bright red and dark red. But the reason it looks blue is because of the way that light reflects through your skin and back. The pH is 7.3 to 3.5 to 4.5. That's slightly basic. 38 degrees Celsius. 37 degrees Celsius is average body temperature, so it's a little bit warmer than average in your body. And it comprises about 8% of your body weight. And males have slightly more blood on average than women, at about 5 liters. Fun fact, even though our blood is always red, other animals don't always have red blood. Spiders, crustaceans like lobsters, cephalopods like octopi and squid, they use copper instead of iron. And so copper in the hemoglobin, which is now hemocyanin, cyan is blue, makes their blood blue. Some worms have green or violet. Now let's discuss all the functions of blood. Why do we need it? Primarily, it's for distribution. So it helps transport different things around our body, like oxygen gas and nutrients that our cells need to function, as well as metabolic wastes that our cells make and need to get rid of. And additionally, hormones, chemical messengers moving through the blood to their target cells, where they make a change that can be longer lasting than a nervous system communication in the body. Next, it helps regulate homeostasis. Homeostasis of our body temperature. So blood's a little bit warmer than average body temperature, right? Well, when you're really hot, when you're working out, what happens to your face? It gets really red. That's because more blood gets sent superficially when we're warm. That way it can cool off. By sweating as well, we're able to evaporatively cool our skin. The blood releases heat there. We cool down. Elephants in Africa have such large ears because they're highly vascularized. They've got a lot of blood flow there. When they get really hot, they wave their ears to cool down. And on the opposite side, when you're cold, you send more blood internal to save those internal organs, reduce heat loss to the extremities. Next, pH. Your blood has buffers, these weak acids and bases that can either grab a hydrogen ion, take it out of solution, or put it back into solution, depending on what's going on there. So if you start to have acidic blood, there's too many hydrogens, those molecules will take the hydrogen up, take them out of solution. Whereas if it's too basic, there's not enough hydrogen, they'll release a hydrogen ion into solution so that your pH doesn't change as much. They resist pH change. And then blood also regulates adequate fluid volume. We're able to get the right amount of blood volume, get the right amount of fluid within our other areas of body fluids as well. And next, it functions as a protection. First, it helps protect itself against blood loss. In your blood itself, you've got platelets, these little pieces of cells, and these plasma proteins that are dissolved in your blood to help reduce blood loss. Whenever you have damage, it forms a clot. And next, you help your body protect against infection. So these are white blood cells, these larger cells in here, and they are our immune response. They look for foreign invaders, foreign particles, they identify them, mark them, break them down. They defend against diseases. So now I would pause the video, answer these questions, and if you didn't get all the answers, go back and watch again. Now let's look at the components of blood, plasma, and the formed elements. Okay. So just to kind of break down for you what's all in blood, out of all your fluids and other tissues, 8% of your body is blood. And if you break that down, a little more than half is plasma, a little less than half is the formed elements, the cells. So first we'll look at plasma, then the formed elements. And we'll look at the protein in there, discuss that it's mostly water and other solutes. We'll look at those proteins. And then in the formed elements, we'll look at red blood cells, white blood cells, and here's the different types, and platelets. So the first thing we look at is plasma, mostly water, and then solutes. And those solutes, as we saw on the last page, mostly proteins. So we're going to look at the different proteins that are dissolved floating around in our blood. The first protein is albumin. That's the same protein that makes up most of an egg white. And this is 60% of the proteins in our blood. And we have it to help maintain normal osmotic pressure. So what that means is that we want the fluid in our plasma, all that water, to stay there. And we need to make sure then that our blood has equal concentrations of solutes, equal to the interstitial fluid, the fluid around our cells. If not, water's going to move to make those concentrations equal. They're not going to have the same things in there, but they're going to have the same amount. That way, water stays in our blood. It doesn't leave. So for example, if we didn't have this protein, our plasma would be really watery. Water would want to leave our blood and go into the tissues because they have more salts and solutes in there. So water wants to go balance it. Next most common type of protein is globulins. So these are these Y-shaped proteins. They function as transporters and antibodies. So as transporters, plasma, as we discussed, is mostly water. Most things dissolve in there and it's great. Some things, though, don't. So anything lipid-based, like steroids, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, corticosteroids, stress hormones, those need some way to go through the blood. So what they do is they attach to a transporter, a globulin, and then they're able to move through. Next, antibodies. So one specific type of our white blood cells produces these Y-shaped proteins. And what they have on the end are these receptors. And those match up with some sort of foreign particle, whether it be a sugar on a bacteria membrane, a protein, some sort of foreign molecule. And when they find it, they bind to it. They can also bind multiples together, and then they can mark those for destruction. So our white blood cells can come in, find the things that are marked more easily, and break them down. And last we have fibrinogen. So fibrinogen is important for blood clotting. When it's just moving around our blood like normal, it's this little Q-shaped protein, fibrinogen. It's small, it dissolves in fluids, it travels through the blood easily. But when it gets the signal during blood clots, these pieces of fibrinogen come together to form fibrin. And there they make this thick wall that helps form a clot. It traps red blood cells and platelets in there to coagulate our blood and reduce blood loss. Most of these plasma proteins come from the liver. So if we have a liver disorder, you can see problems with your clotting process, maintaining osmotic balance, and transporting, for example. Other solutes, other things dissolved, you've got byproducts of metabolism, some nitrogenous wastes like urea, creatinine, nutrients, glucose, carbohydrates, amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. We have to get those to the cells. Electrolytes or ions, charged particles like sodium and potassium, respiratory gases, oxygen, coming into our body, going to the cells to use them. When they make energy with the oxygen, they release carbon dioxide. If that builds up in our blood, it's toxic, so we have to get it out. And then hormones. So that was the fluid, that was the extracellular matrix, the plasma. Now let's look at the cells, the formed elements. So if you look at a blood slide, you'll see it's mostly comprised of these red blood cells, erythrocytes, and they're so thin in the middle that sometimes they look see-through. The larger cells in here are going to be white blood cells, and then little pieces of cells are going to be the platelets. All blood cells form from the same place, in your red bone marrow. And what happens there is you have stem cells, and depending on what signals they get, what proteins they put on the outside, they'll turn into different types of cells. The first step we're going to look at are red blood cells, erythrocytes. These are biconcave. What that means is that they go in the middle on both sides. That is so that we have an increased surface area. More surface area means more oxygen can diffuse into there and out. The reason that they are like this as well is that they are anucleate. So during their final division to become red blood cells, they eject their nucleus. So now they're basically just sacs surrounded by membrane filled with hemoglobin. In fact, 97% of the cell is hemoglobin, abbreviated HB. And that's for gas transport, primarily for oxygen. So they can transport oxygen, but they don't use it. So they can bring it to our cells, the cells can use it. And they contribute the most to blood viscosity. The number of red blood cells you have, your hematocrit, the percent that's red blood cells, determines your blood viscosity. More red blood cells means thicker blood. Less red blood cells, thinner blood. So let's look at hemoglobin. Hemoglobin can actually carry oxygen and carbon dioxide. In fact, it also carries carbon monoxide, and that binds at the same spot as oxygen. And so there, it binds better than oxygen, and they compete. And if you get carbon monoxide poisoning, the carbon monoxide binds, and then you can't carry oxygen. But carbon dioxide, CO2, that binds somewhere else. So oxygen and carbon dioxide don't compete. Iron binds the oxygen, carbon dioxide binds somewhere else. Hemoglobin can carry both at once, no competition. On each piece, each subunit of hemoglobin, this protein with 4 subunits, there is a heme group. That heme has the iron in the middle where oxygen can bind. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 subunits with 1, 2, 3, 4 hemes. So that means that each hemoglobin can transport 4 oxygen molecules.